Look, all right, I know what's going on. I know you guys are on Grail Country right now. You're having a conversation about all kinds of things. I was there too, but it's 1 o'clock on a Thursday, at least my time. I don't know what everyone else's time is. And that means it's the time we talk about judges. So we're going to talk about judges. I don't know if Sandy is out there. Sandy might be out there. Sandy, come join us. You have been beckoned. If anyone would like to join, I will post the link. I'm gonna post that link. Come join us. Join us for conversations about judges. This week, we're talking about one of my favorite sections of Book of Judges. And that is the story that everybody knows, Samson and Delilah. Yes, I like the Samson and Delilah story. Everyone does. A lot of people now feels like insult the things that we all agree are great. It's like if you want to be a fan of Shakespeare, you got to pick some and someone says, "What's your favorite play?" You got to pick like the most obscure thing imaginable. It's the only way to have real cred. You have to say like one of the Henry plays or something like that. Look, it's all right to love things that are good. The reason why there are things that are considered to be the best stories is because they're really good. And right now, we are going to talk about one of those really good stories, Samson and Delilah. So let me just gonna bother some people, see if I can call them out. Uh, all right, you've more officially been beckoned, Sandy, in that I text you. For anyone who is watching this as well, after this week, we're going to be taking 2 weeks off because I am going to be in jolly old England, which is exciting. Now, I'm going to bring up the text as well. There we go. So we're going bare minimum. Perhaps no one comes in, and if no one comes in, then I'll just read the text and we'll talk about it next time when we actually got some people. Um, let's get into the Book of Judges, shall we? Yosef. Yosef is saying, ironically, Samson isn't considered to be the best story by Jewish sources, but I can guess why Christians like it so much. A Greek style tragedy that ends in self sacrificial martyrdom. Yes, Yosef, I think you're quite right about some of that stuff. And he does, we kind of mentioned this before, he's a bit of a, he seems very similar to other kind of myths. He's much more of a mythical hero that I could see, um, yeah, as you said, Greekish thinking people particularly liking. What? Well, Yosef, if you're watching, what is the favorite of the when you think of judges? What is the Jewish perspective on what you think of? Just thinking of like children's Bibles and stuff like that. He's Samson is an easy to draw figure. So if you wanna depict the Book of Judges and you want to depict one of its heroes, I think a guy with lots and lots of hair. Yeah, I mean, it's got all the fairy tale qualities to it too. I think it works on multiple levels. I would love your perspective, Joseph, even if it's just for a couple of minutes on, I believe that Samson is the central figure of Judges. I know that there was some conversation about whether or not it should be Gideon. But I'm pretty sure that Samson is the central figure. So if you could correct me, that would be great. Yeah, Deborah gets a lot more focus. That makes a lot of sense. She's probably the most positive of the judges. Is there anything negative about Deborah in the text? It basically is just that it's a woman who is in charge that is sometimes used as evidence of difficulty in the Deborah story. Yeah, I could see Deborah is definitely a hero without having to qualify, which I agree. Yeah, we could try to say who's the most heroic figure. Joseph is saying, yes, I support Gideon is the central figure. The chiastic structure of the book is focused on Gideon, and the book turns from positive to negative between him and his son. I agree with that, and he is at the beginning of that. But if you're looking at amount of time dedicated, and that the book itself, Gideon is a back and forth character. Samson is a tragic figure. It ends tragically. And the book itself ends tragically. So to me, even the section that we're talking about today, Samson is much more emblematic of what the book of Judges is like. So this chapter that is about Samson, it has an end. It ends twice. The ending twice is one of the things I find particularly interesting. So at the end of this chapter, you have this, he had judged Israel 20 years. Okay. And this is at the end of this incredibly tragic story of him and Delilah and him getting his eyes gouged out and the self-sacrificial death and all that business. Yes. But at the end of 15, when he does his other most famous thing, when he's killing people with the jawbone of an ass, end of this chapter, and he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. It seems to me like you even could, like, it's like the story ends and ends heroically, sounds like God rescuing the Israelites out of the desert where, oh, there's Sandy, where he gives the water in the wilderness. God split open the hollow place that is in Lehi, and water came out from there. So it sounds like that heroic positive ending. But that's, the writer decides, I don't want to end there. Yes, Cassandra. No, it's the next 2 weeks we're gone. So we got one today. But yeah, so the ending of the Samson story is not 15. It is 16. It ends in utter catastrophe. And this is also, he is the character where the description of him is the description of all of Israel. The way that Gideon is described is not how all of Israel is described, but the way that Samson is described is the way all of Israel is described. Did what was right in their own eyes. Hi, Sandy.
Hey, I'm sorry I'm late.
No, you were over on Grail Country.
Well, I was listening to Grail Country, yes, but I was late because they're doing heating cooling inspections in my building today, and timing. Yeah.
Yeah. Joseph, I promise I won't bother you anymore, but do you understand? I respect Joseph's opinion, and with what I just said about that breakdown the description of Samson being like the description of the people of Israel in the book. Does that make sense? Why I would think that? What is the purpose of describing him the exact same as the people of Israel if he is not the central, if he is not the capstone of the book? The book being a tragedy, you want a tragedy. You need a tragic figure. He may not respond. And in case he doesn't, Sandy, we are going to get into Samson and Delilah.
The words, that show up so often that I don't yet recognize immediately, like chiastic structure.
Okay, so a chiasm, think of the structure as like this, okay? You could even see it as two things. I can give a perfect example of that, which is the days of creation, okay? So a chiastic structure is you have a middle, and then everything matches the other side, right?
Oh, is it like when you draw the integer line and you have, like, it's like Vervaeke's class where they're trying to talk about the thing and the no thing. So you've got your positive and your -1 and your positive and -2. And you're like, is it the kind of some kind of equivalent on either side matching?
Yeah, where there would be a matching story, each one going with the other.
Interesting.
So even sometimes we talk about bookends, right? Mm-hmm. Where a story will start and end the same way, where there'll be aspects of the story where, like, sometimes it'll be animals at this and animals there. It'll be here and there, right? This isn't quite a chiasm because it's more of a repetition of the same thing, not a mirroring. But yeah, in the creation, dark and light. Then the next day is sea and sky. And then the next day is the creation of land. And then the next 3 days are the filling of those spaces that were already created. Right? So you get the heavenly lights, right? So the lights are then the thing that's focused on. Remember, light and darkness created day 1. Yep. Day 4 lines up with day 2, where the what's it called? Where the fish and birds, right? Mm-hmm. So so those are created, and then the last day, where the last thing God created was the land, and so it's all the land creatures, all in one place.
So it's not so even creation. That's not a mirror image of, unless you count it as there is where did it get shared? The real mirror, where when you look in the mirror, you see yourself as you are, not as the reverse of what you are.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, apparently it creeps people out.
Yeah. Well, and there's some, I don't know why it's not immediately coming to my mind, but yeah. So in some of the biblical stories, which by the way is one of the reasons why it's ridiculous. Certain things like, have you ever heard of JEDP? Have you ever heard of that, Sandy?
Never.
Sometimes called sometimes called the documentary hypothesis. The documentary hypothesis is the idea that the biblical text, especially the Torah, was for texts that were sewed together later. And they were so at the end of the Noah story, there's a section which kind of retells Noah again. But sometimes they use the divine name, sometimes they don't use the divine name.
Keep talking.
Yeah.
I need water. I'm not sure. I'm weird. Just kind of like turned my stomach, and I'm like, like when you feel like you walked somewhere that's not.
Oh, yeah, you're getting vertigo.
Like, yeah, I'll be back.
Yeah. So where you get this phenomenon, 50 feels weird to be talking without being able to see you. What was I saying? Now I'm thinking about
The letters I didn't know.
Oh, JEDP. So it's used as evidence where there's like little aspects where like God will be referred to in some sections of a story using the divine name. And sometimes he'll be referred to specifically in Genesis as El Shaddai, God Almighty. And so basically, the hypothesis is that there was once a version of the story where God is referred to by his name, and that's J because of sorry for all the Jewish audience, Jehovah, as the divine name. E is Elohim, so that's your El Shaddai's, where Abraham interacts with God and calls him El, but sometimes he interacts with him and calls him by his name, right? Those are different things. But I think that when you look at things like, hello, Michael, when you look at chiastic structure and whatnot, what that shows is actually that the text wasn't quilt worked, patched together. Things like chiastic structure and like literally verse for verse matching up shows that the books are very well constructed and not last minute, oh crap, how do we include the E version of the priestly source of this story, and they just like put them together hodgepodge.
If it, oh dear. If I just apologize for asking this.
Mm-hmm.
You described it as quilt-like.
Yeah.
But that's not right. I went queasy because it's like skin. What would it be without it being sewed together? Is that what you were just saying with the?
Well, that is exactly what I'm saying is the thing is not scrapped together. It is a cohesive thing. And so I think it's basically impossible to unweave the rope. You can't, I don't think you can unweave the stories, unweave the bits. It is an ancient story form that you might have a poem right after telling it like narratively. That happens if you remember all the way back in the Deborah story. It happens narrative, like in narrative form, and then it switches, and all of a sudden, now we're describing it as a poem. Right? In a novel, you would think that was a waste. If the end of a chapter of a novel had a poem that was all of the things that just happened in the chapter, you'd be like, why are you doing this? But I love it. I absolutely love it. I think it's, yeah. Michael, did you have thoughts to add in right now?
Well, I mean, so I do think the JEDP, the documentary hypothesis, is rather nonsensical. I mean, well, I think there's a certain aspect where you can make a case for some things, because it's like once like, because like Genesis, like I think Genesis was probably an oral tradition of some sort. It may even have been written, and then like Moses takes that and all the stuff that happens, and then he dies, and so then somebody like whatever Joshua and probably like Samuel, it comes and they kind of keep like, here's the new Bible with all the parts of the Bible in it, and they just add like those little things, like whatever, the like parts that are in parentheses and things like that. So it's like there's editorial like little changes, but I think it seems very clear that like the main bulk of the story is the same.
Yeah.
And they even like, they know, like they've shown that like what tends to happen is like somebody writes a manuscript and then they'll put some note in the margin about something, like, oh, this place is now called Ur of the Chaldees or whatever, when it used to be called something else. And then over time, the next guy that copies it ends up just taking that note and sticking it in the text. So it's like there's these little changes that happen. I mean, my thing is
Right.
that God allows all this stuff to happen. You know, it's not the deal breaker that people make it out to be. But I have noticed, like, because I like to go to all the thrift stores, and if there's any, like, sometimes you'll find like real theological books, but they're old and outdated. And
Oh
man,
yeah.
they just leaned so heavy on that stuff now, because literally it was like, I don't understand this passage. Must be because the source materials came from different sources. So there's
Yeah.
no effort to like harmonize any parts of the narrative together.
Yeah, and I don't want to get totally off track, but there's been all these conversations in the corner about meta modern Christianity, and there's two different parts of it that I see as needing to be addressed. One is this real like re-enchantment, trying to discover things, and those are difficult and all this other stuff. But there's a secondary part, which I don't even think is what metamodernism is trying to address, which is the fact that if you apply the skepticism that you were using in modernity, if you apply that to the criticisms, some of those criticisms fall apart. So
Most
you
of
make
them.
a complaint like, it seems like there could be in some of these situations other documents, and then you propose different things. Well, your proposal actually has less evidence than the cohesion of the text. The breakdown of the text has less evidence than the cohesion of it. I think that needs to be addressed. Yeah, some of the arguments are so bad against the text. They're like, yeah. I don't want to get into mark and priority. I had a conversation about mark and priority earlier this week, and the evidence that is used to in biblical studies, it's like, if you want to be a conspiracy theorist and but you're not interested in politics, do biblical studies. They got plenty of room for the most crackpot conspiracies about how the text came together. Okay, let's get into the actual story we're going to talk about, shall we, Sandy?
I'd appreciate it.
That would be wonderful. So, Sandy, how about you? I'm going to make this even bigger for you. Oh, look at that. That's very readable.
It's beautiful.
Yes. We get Michael twice. I don't even understand. One of them is evil, but you can't tell because both of them have a goatee.
One of them was a phone, and now I'm actually at home and I can use the computer for once. So why not?
Wonderful. Sandy, read for us.
Samson went to Gaza, and there he saw a prostitute, and he went in to her. The Gazites were told, Samson has come here. And they surrounded the place and set an ambush for him all night at the gate of the city. They kept quiet all night, saying, let us wait until the light of the morning, then we will kill him. But Samson lay till midnight, and at midnight he arose and took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the two posts, and pulled them up, bar and all, and put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that is in front of Hebron.
Michael, this is why you like Samson so much. This is so cool. This is such a cool strongman thing. Just picks gate, everything to it. Post and all, pulls them up, bar and all, pulls them up, drags them in the middle of the night. It's great. It's great. It's a great scene. Perfect movie sequence. Sandy, keep reading.
After this, he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, seduce him, see where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to humble him. And we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver. So Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength lies and how you might be bound, that no one could subdue you.
Okay, pause. Okay, so when things occur repeatedly, it is, I think it makes makes ideas much more clear. So Samson didn't like one girl who was from the bad side of town. It's repeatedly marries the Philistine woman. After that, sleeps with a prostitute. After that, gets with Delilah. Right? 2 is a coincidence. 3 is a pattern. Right? We know what she's like. We know what kind of a person he's into. This is exactly what he's like. And if things didn't work out with Delilah, he would have found another person exactly like Delilah. That's what he would have gone for. If we can see that pattern, which is already set here. Like this chapter is the chapter of his downfall, and so it has 2 women of bad background. Yeah. Any comments on that, guys?
Well, just, all that stuff Solomon said in Proverbs about chasing women is good wisdom.
I realized.
I guess he didn't have access to that. So
Yes.
I mean, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Michael wants again to make reference to strong libidinal urges. Sandy, do you have any thoughts on that?
No.
No. Okay. There is also within this the betrayal for pieces of silver. I see there's something in the end of his story where he becomes like Joseph. Okay, so the betrayal for silver. And then there's going to be the fact that even as I titled this stream, more in his death, is the idea that Samson actually conquers more in the way he dies than he does in life. Joseph was quite right in thinking, that's why Christians probably like this.
Well, it's interesting though to say, obviously it says sometime later, so it's not the same thing. But this does give us an interesting contrast in that, like, with the prostitute, he's just going and doing the thing. But then it says that he fell in love. Well, here's his love. I'm looking at NIV. It says fell in love with Delilah, and then they're telling her seduce him, like, use your physical charms or whatever, I guess. So it's like which is kind of like what the same thing with his first tragic marriage or whatever. It seems like, I mean, I would say maybe in that, well, I don't know, say obviously nothing is like 1-for-1 correspondence or whatever.
Yeah.
So if we want to say like Samson is like Israel and not like God, or maybe you could say it is like Israel, like, just because like Israel's like usually the in the masculine feminine thing, like God is the man and Israel is the woman, and so Samson's the man. But it's like he has this thing where he has a want that is like the more ideal want, but the problem is the women are not the right women, and like they don't exist, which, I mean, I guess that's kind of the issue with, like, because when it refers to Israel as being like a prostitute or whatever, it's like saying you're doing this thing, you're supposed to be the bride, but you're not acting like a bride. So, but it is interesting. It's not, it does seem like he has that thing where, it's saying like he fell in love. It's not just like a sex thing for him.
Yeah. And we talked about that a little bit last week about the idea of the people you date versus the people you marry. And I realized both of you are shiksas because, Michael, your wife is Jewish, isn't she? Her background is
yeah.
And
a quarter. So
Sandy's ex is Jewish. So you guys, I was talking about shiksas last week.
And it's not my ex. I would still be with him if he had not decided to get in a hurry to go where he was going.
Okay. Yeah,
I wanted 30 years minimum, but that would have put him a little too close to 100 than he wanted to be.
Yeah. But within this concept, the idea that you
Yeah.
almost you bind too much
Well-
of yourself. It's not he's not, in my mind, he's not offering to them, you become like me, you know, like the Ruth story, right? Your people will be my people. Instead, he's basically saying that to them. He's not pulling them up. He's letting them drag him down.
Okay, I have a question then. I do actually have a comment or a question. Because when you look at when you look at the patterns of, you know, is Israel being like a prostitute, or what are the relationship in the stories to people in terms of how you relate to them and what their place and position is and why. Like you've got the story with was it Jacob? No. Anyways, who's the father-in-law of Tamar, where she goes, and
Judah.
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 Wait, it's not Jacob. So you've got the story of Judah, where you have something that looks like this, but is not this. But it is something. Wait, sorry.
Well, and I'm kind of wondering within this as well, the way that his Samson's empowerment appears in the text, it's like a strong libidinous urge where he becomes possessed almost. Like all of a sudden the spirit of the Lord rushes upon him, right? It's not this consistent thing. There's a call on his life. He lives to a higher thing. And this is part of what he does, right? Instead, the good that he does throughout the text is almost this spike, this all of a sudden, this one moment God takes hold of him and he's able to do something incredible. But then also his lust will take hold of him and something terrible will happen, right? Like he is a sail open for any breeze.
He's been prophesied about. He's
yep.
Tonight we'll make some. He has this pressing need to tell me that his muscles are impressive and he needs healthy food so that he can.
Just like Samson. Yeah.
Just like Samson. Yeah. But maybe he's going to make some tea. So Samson is designated for a role that is inconsistent with the majority of people in Israel. You know, he's set apart. Mm-hmm. He's going to be someone who is set apart, and there are rules that go with that. But aside from the introduction in the story itself, I'm not actually seeing him demonstrate that in any way.
That's right. Even the weapon that people associate with him, the jawbone of a donkey, is an item which would be considered unclean for a Nazirite to wield.
Yeah,
he picks up an item that would necessarily defile him by that higher standard. That again, Sandy, is actually why I think he exemplifies Israel, because you don't have to be a Nazirite to serve God, right? And you don't have to be.
Did we figure out where the instruction? Where's the instructions about being a Nazirite?
It's in Numbers. Let me just pull it up. We talked about that a little.
For it. Yeah, go ahead. What I'm curious about is, on the one hand, okay, and this might be just girl brain, I don't know. On the one hand, you have Samson, who is going to exemplify one of the holiest kind of patterns that you can follow, as you know, in terms of demonstrating, like giving a living example of dedication to God. You know, all these rules, all these patterns and things that you live by. And on the other hand, I'm looking at the story and I'm going, it reminds me of Tamar and Judah, and I'm like, she's the kind of reverse of that, in a sense, to me, where she's demonstrating all the things you don't want to be and do. And
Right,
he's in
right.
the wrong and she's in the right. And I'm like, really? Like,
Yeah.
but it's not for all the things you would normally put together.
Right.
And even that goes to that place where I suddenly felt queasy going, please don't sew this thing together in some bizarre way, because you can't sew it together in this warped pattern. The one we would normally describe as being warped is what they're demonstrating, but that's only because we don't get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think, the phrase that rightfully so, people get very fearful when people start saying, but, to say like the ends justify the means is, it's usually wrong because of our perspective being so limited, but it is true for God. His ends justify whatever means brings them about, and it's kind of, it's like you can always look at these things on these different like layers of analysis where it's like, oh, Samson the Nazarite, he wasn't a good Nazarite because he broke the rules. But as a judge, he did some things that were good. But, as like a husband, he failed. As and then like as a model for the whole nation, it's like there's like good and bad, like all the way up on the different levels of analysis.
So the Milton Samson story that I was talking about last week, the ending of it, so the whole thing takes place when Samson, like basically the day that Samson's going to die. Okay. And he's going through his whole life story, what had happened to him, where, the fact that he's going to be this great rescuer is spoken of twice, right? The angel appears twice to his parents to say what he will be. So they have such a strong promise, but he barely does anything in his life. And part of the story is the idea that in the last minute, he has faith in God and does believe that God could work in him even in the end. Yosef, it's not merely that it's a jawbone. It says that it's a fresh jawbone, right? That's part of the description of it that yeah. Here, let me just, this is the passage from Numbers 6. All the days that he separates himself to Hashem, he shall not go near a dead body, not even for his father or for his mother, for brother or sister. If they die, shall he make himself unclean, because his separation to God is on his head. All the days of his separation, he is holy to Hashem. And if any man dies very suddenly beside him, and he defiles his consecrated head, then he shall shave his head on the day of his cleansing. On the 7th day, he shall shave it. On the 8th day, he shall bring 2 turtle doves, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So I think part of that is, that's part of what is happening. He has defiled himself, and it's like he should be shaving his own head. But instead he's captured and he's like it's done to him.
Well, it seems like we're assuming is because it's saying if your father or mother or brother or sister dies, could it only be referring to? I mean, I'm not saying like now that we now have a whatever, and I'm sure that the modern rabbinic interpretation is more nuanced, as most of them usually are. But I mean, could that have just been human bodies? Which, I mean, in a sense, if you're killing people, then you're always near a suddenly dead body. But I don't know if the donkey counts or not. I mean, I don't know.
Right. Well, and something like leather wouldn't count, right? Which is why, as best I understand, the reference to the jawbone of the donkey is that it's fresh. The freshness of it, I think, is important because that means that it is unclean, right? You're talking about touching something with blood and everything, which is different than just
I'm pretty sure, and this is like, big Eva stuff here, but I'm pretty sure I saw something about how like the characteristics of the donkey bone are much like stronger and more durable when it's fresh, like and therefore it was a superior weapon. Like it would have cracked if it was old and dried out, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It's a weird thing because if you say like, is that just a true fact about the state of the donkey bone, like, or is it significant symbolically in one way or another? I don't know.
Well, it's just his interaction with animal corpses, right? I find particularly interesting, right? We know that the lion is fresh, right? It's like the little bits about it. It just seems like he is interacting with things that are to me unclean, right? Also, I'm sorry. Why is he only holding the jawbone? Has two sides to it, but he's only ever holding one of those sides. I want him to have two. I want him dual wielding just the one jawbone.
You mean in artwork, in depictions?
Yes. Yeah, he's always just holding the one clean one. Look, he had to have ripped that thing in half. Yeah. So Cassandra is asking this question. If Samson is constantly breaking his Nazarite calling, why does he only lose strength when she cuts his hair? I do think that it's supposed to be like it speaks specifically as this sign, this consecrating being on his head. And that it's this outward sign. So it's like, it's supposed to be integrity, the top and the bottom, all the way through, right? And he loses his power when the integrity is gone, bottom to top as well. His bottom integrity might be gone, but his top integrity is still maintained until that occurs.
I mean, I wonder maybe though, like, because think about this. So if we say like he's always violating his rules, but maybe we could say that he's not on a technicality. Like if it is, like if we like, because it could be the sort of thing where if God gives a rule and we want to treat it like it has a fence around it because we're more afraid of dishonoring God. So we would say, I don't know if animal bodies count, but maybe he's saying it's not a human body, it's okay. But then when he gets to this thing with the hair, there's no excuse for that. Like, and maybe
right,
that's why
it's the last straw. There's nothing debatable.
How everything. I mean, we haven't quite read it yet, but because everything happened, like a lot of the, like he has the thing about like braiding the hair and stuff. Like he's like hinting at the source.
Yeah, closer and closer. Yeah.
Like it could, maybe this is the only. Well, I don't know. Does he drink? Just show him drinking.
It does not drink wine, but he fights the lion in a vineyard. And it says he threw a feast like they did in those days. So it seems to me like he throws a kegger and he fights the lion in a vineyard. So there's this, there's definitely, he's getting closer and closer to the line. Cassandra said the final layer stripped. I think that might be it's the final straw. Let's.
You know what's weird? Like, the thing about this though, because like we say like Jesus, they will call him a Nazarite or whatever, and in some sense it's like what happens when like Jesus like breaks the rules, but like when he touches a dead body, what happens to the dead body? It's not a dead body anymore, like
right.
So and then like and then there's like the thing at the wedding in Cana, where he says like it's not my time. But then he, he turns the water into wine, and it's like he, like he's the one that like makes the rules, like he fulfills them or whatever in some way. But I don't know. I've thought about that one because it really contrasts Noah, getting drunk a lot. I think because that's what I think. Like Noah was like, we did it, we survived the apocalypse. Now it's it's the age of partying, and he was kind of a little premature. But I don't know, but
I still wonder how much we think like, in Western thought patterns, and how much we read into the story just because we don't even like. I can look at this and I think to myself, I don't know why I reacted the way I did at the beginning. I don't know why. Like there's a whole bunch of things I just don't know, and I often wonder. I don't know if we really. I mean, I don't know if we even, for all of our studying for a while, do we really know what God considers holy? We understand what has been told to us in terms of some of the patterns that God gives us to follow, but that doesn't really explain to me whether, if I run around saying, well, this therefore is that which is holy, that, see that little thing I'm holding here, that. I don't think that's how God works.
Well, and I think that's one of the reasons why there's a big emphasis on the rules that are not up for interpretation. It's interesting because this idea of touching a dead body, I'm going to say that Samson probably touched a whole bunch of dead bodies when he killed all those people.
But does it matter if he's touching it through a donkey bone? Like, is it like electricity? Like when you touch an electric fence with a piece of grass or whatever.
Great job, Michael. Great job. Okay, yes, but he definitely crosses the line. Yeah, this idea of it's so interesting. The notion of the spirit of the law. Is he breaking the spirit of the law? And the thing with Samson is, I would say that he is. To respond to Jason, who's talking about Enkidu, is there a connection with Enkidu and Samson? Enkidu is from the Epic of Gilgamesh. If you don't know that character, he's sometimes depicted as having bull-like horns. I did make a comparison before of Gilgamesh with Samson, because the most popular image of Gilgamesh is him holding a lion, just him holding a lion like it's a little baby. There we are. There's Enkidu.
You saw him last week.
Yes.
Holding his favorite pet lion around the throat.
I really like the Epic of Gilgamesh. So, Jason, sometime we should talk about just the Epic of Gilgamesh. Let's continue on, shall we? Oh, okay. This is what Enkidu loses his power as he becomes civilized, symbolized by eating bread, drinking mead, and putting on garments, which distances him from his wild nature and reduces his former strength. Jason, that is incorrect. Enkidu only does those things because he loses his powers because he sleeps with the woman. He sleeps with the woman. You will remember she welcomes his eagerness. This is one of the best descriptions of welcomes his eagerness and taught to him the savage man, the woman's art. That's the best way that sex is referred to in the ancient world, the woman's art. He lay on her murmuring love for 6 days and 7 nights. And then he wakes up and he loses all of his powers. It says it feels like he's bound. So yeah, I guess the binding feeling as though he's bound with a cord. Fine. But that seems more like it's almost a retelling of the Adam and Eve story than it is the Samson story. This could be a bringing back to utter vulnerability, right? Like the layers, like it's a nudity, right? For this covering on Samson to be taken off, for him to be reduced. Fully vulnerable. Let's go from verse 6, shall we? Sandy, go ahead and read from verse 6.
So Delilah said to Samson, "Please tell me where your great strength lies, and how you might be bound that one could subdue you." And Samson said to her, "If they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, then I shall become weak and be like any be like any other man." Then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she bound him with them. Now she had men lying in ambush in an inner chamber, and she said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he snapped the bowstrings, as a thread of flax snaps when it touches the fire. So the secret of his strength was not known.
Okay, so the positioning of his hair, that he has his hair in 7 locks, I think the 7 bowstrings is connected with that. So as Michael said, as you go on, it gets closer and closer to what the actual thing is. And then we get this rehash of the notion of a thread of flax snaps when it touches the fire. This is calling back to how he broke the things on him. And that again was like possessed by God almost. So that's there. Question for you guys. Does it at all sound, oh no, we'll get there. We'll get there. Sandy, read on.
Then Delilah said to Samson, "Behold, you have mocked me and told me lies. Please tell me how you might be bound." And he said to her, "If they bind me with new ropes that have not been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man." So Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." And the men lying in ambush were in an inner chamber. But he snapped the ropes off his arms like a thread.
Mm-hmm. And read this last one before we get in here.
Yep. Then Delilah said to Samson, "Until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you might be bound." And he said to her, "If you weave the 7 locks of my head with the web and fasten it tight with the pin, then I shall become weak and be like any other man." So while he slept, Delilah took 7 locks of his head and wove them into the web, and she made them tight with the pin and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he woke from his sleep and pulled away the pin, the loom, and the web.
Okay, so this is my question right out the gate. Is this a sex thing? Is this like, because Cassandra was asking this before. Jason, Delilah sounds so hot. Where it's like, hey, maybe could I tie you up? Kind of a thing. Like that this gets brought up over and over again. That's possible. Like, I don't know. To me, that's possible because he likes sketchy ladies. He likes prostitutes. And then he gets with a girl and she's like, "Hey, how do I tie you up?"
It could be in a sense that I wondered earlier. He has incredible strength, and you will need to be able to demonstrate your strength and stand against something. And I kind of wonder, like, if he's appropriately choosing a wife from among his own people,
Right.
he's more bound within the parameters of his community and the laws of his God and the expectations of, like all the family and the things that, traditions that we usually adhere to. So he's going outside of that where he can play with his strength a little bit. So it's quite possible that he's just simply tormenting her for his own fun and hoping that it kind of, gives them both enough that edge of anger that's not quite actual anger, and therefore you kind of are, like butting heads. And yeah. So maybe.
In the words of Proverbs, do not give your strength to women, your ways to those who destroy kings.
Darn, I wonder where he would have learned that.
Yeah, Michael, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, kind of to what Sandy was saying, like, it's definitely weird. And, I was noticing this about, there's this book by Camille Paglia, her big famous book, Sexual Personae. And it's like just all about the history of art. And the thing is you realize like all of our culture or whatever, like that is created through art, like everybody that was married and had a family and was normal was too busy providing to create culture. So culture has always been made by the weirdos, and Samson's kind of a weirdo.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting as well because they talk about the female as the secret, as the and the real culture is actually created by women, and it's how they make the world is what our culture is. So the example that I've heard is like if you want really, really good Italian food, you're in Italy, it's not in a restaurant, right? The restaurants across the country will be very, very similar. But if you want to actually get the cuisine and the culture of that specific place, it's the women. It's the people where that's what they do and what they've mastered. That becomes what the culture is, right? If you think of certain jobs being jobs that were traditionally done by women, like cooking and sewing, what that meant was the dress, what people wore, and what they ate. The major things we think about as culture were produced by women and not by men. And now we're living in a time where that's kind of, you don't think of the best food as coming from home, right?
Yeah.
Like it used to
yeah.
be an expression. If you want a home cooked meal, you come visit me, right? Like you'd hear that. You have family in this town. You want a home cooked meal, not a restaurant meal.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think, well, that's the thing, is that for most of history, that the enduring culture was just the routines of everyday life and survival.
Right.
But it's a weird thing where what survives time, and from like the outside perspective is the like anything that was written, it was expensive to write. Anything carved in stone, it's expensive to carve in stone. Anything that's like made of jewelry or whatever, made of gold and silver, like those are all outliers. Even it's like the homes people lived in or whatever. Like anything made of wood or a tent, it's not going to last.
And that was the real culture. That was the real.
It only lasts through the transmission of generations passed on. But then now we, kind of with our like globalized space, the means of transmitting that more basic thing is what's kind of dissolving, and now we're left with all the weird artifacts that have come from all over.
Yeah.
So here's another weird thing.
Go nuts.
I'm already there. So two things. I was thinking about culture within the home, in a sense. So when I look at the two relationships I got to have, in the first one, the majority dynamic was to tell me who I am and not allow me to reveal who I am. In the second one, it was all question, asking, who are you? And because of who you are, who does that make us? Are we bonding? And in the first one, it was we had a process, we had a ceremony. Here's the piece of paper. Now you do what I say.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when I look at this section of the story, if you take away the Philistines from this particular story, the dynamic you have here is the potential to build an incredibly strong relationship between two people who don't mind playing together. But that's not what's actually happening. And I only know that because there was no play in one relationship, and there was all play and all seriousness around the play in my other relationship. So when I read this, I'm like, there again, what you were talking about at the beginning, and why the thing that made me queasy is not the, like you don't just, you sew some things together, but some things you don't sew together, because when you sew them together, you immobilize. You stabilize them. And the story has to be able to breathe and move, and it is doing that with us.
Well, and it's that's part of the thing about, for instance, listening or compromising. If compromising with a loving person is going to bring out good things. Compromising with someone who's like a narcissist or someone who's abusive is just going to enable. And so you get this idea where people talk, like people are so ready to just so wary of the possibility that compromising is always bad, that they don't realize that, like, if you're in a healthy relationship, that's how you grow. You grow through compromising and listening, and like I described the dynamic when I'm talking with my wife or with other people about the dynamics between men and women, is I think of it as too much, not enough. Right? Is like the different characteristics. One will be too much, one will be not enough, and they pull on each other, and then you compromise, and then you learn what the perspective that you were missing was.
And even within the two halves of that relationship, that person you form, within each person, there's still a dynamic of too much, not enough. And where you are realizing that together, me and Jack, I don't think we never called it compromise. It would always be something related to what the topic was, but we didn't call it compromise. But it was definitely giving space to the other person, acknowledging that person was not always too much, was not always not enough. And sometimes they needed, the space needed to adjust. Yes.
Yeah. And I use the language of too much, not enough, because that's sometimes how we experience it. We experience the other person being so different from us that it's just like, well, why aren't you noticing this? Or why are you noticing this? And instead of being like, no, being like, how do I try to integrate what you're thinking, how you're seeing, into something better? But if you do that with someone who is deeply unhealthy, then what does that look like? And that, to me, is part of the Samson thing.
Okay.
Is they have
like the same thing, but it looks like the same thing in the way that your four-letter or whatever thing creates something that it doesn't necessarily intend. If you give space to a narcissist, you take all of their too much places and overwhelm them with them. And you take all of their not enough places and you leave them like hanging empty in this space. And then they freak out. Yeah. Because there's no, they just do, because that's been life. Yeah. Sorry. Probably
no.
TMI.
No. I think, and is specifically, Samson is on the run from the Philistines all the time. A lot of people, you read it, and the first time it's like, how does he not know? Right? But if he's constantly having issues with the Philistines, then this is just one of those examples. And it seems separate from just the secrets that a husband and wife have with each other. So she's like, she's in the secret place. It's in their own house. It's in the safety of that home that she makes with him. Tell me where your great strength lies. Let me know your secret, right? And I feel like it's such a blessing to have someone where you can share a secret with them. But the problem is we've all had that experience where we share a secret with someone who should not have been trusted. Yeah. Okay, continue reading.
Staring at verse 15 going, boy, we haven't learned much in a few thousand years.
The way that she sounds in this. Yeah. Go ahead.
And she says to him, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times, and you have not told me where your great strength lies. And when she pressed him hard with her words day after day and urged him, his soul was vexed to death. And he told her with all his heart, don't cry, and said to him, a razor has never come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man.
That dynamic, it's phenomenal.
Yep.
You didn't read it dramatically enough, though, Sandy.
How
can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times, and you have not told me where your great strength lies.
I know. I was struggling with the fact it's from the Bible, and I'm like, do I just go to town on this, or do I?
It's pretty dramatic.
Yeah. Day after day after day after.
Day after day. Did you see what Cassandra's saying? Samson got #girl bossed.
Yeah. So sorry.
All right, let me read this section. I love this section so much. When Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called the lords of the Philistines, saying, come up again, for he has told me all his heart. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hands. She made him sleep on her knees, and she called a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. And she said, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And he awoke from his sleep and said, I will go out as at other times and shake myself free. But he did not know that Hashem had left him. And the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze shackles. And he ground at the mill in the prison. But the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Well, that was fun, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Sandy?
Well, my other wondering has been, so a lot of Nazarites don't shave their hair, and none of them had the strength of Samson. So why?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why this?
Yeah.
You know, how sad it is that, and yet it's God as well in his timing. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he knows he knows. But yeah, that's really something.
Well, there's something about Samson where being a Nazarite means that he is a public. It's a spectacle. Being a Nazarite is a spectacle. If you think of this man as being, I don't know how old you picture him, but he's got very long hair. Okay. It is very long by this point. He is a public spectacle, and it's supposed to be a positive public spectacle. And so the ending is also he is a public spectacle. It is a public spectacle that they don't merely kill him. They wish to torment him, to drag this out, to make a public display of him in the same way that being a Nazirite was a public display. And
it doesn't say how quickly this happened. I mean, if he has long hair from, the time of his birth to whenever that was shaved, do they leave him that long again? Like, how long is it till it's long enough?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, all that stuff is, it's not specified in the text. It just says, okay, hair starts growing back. But we do, this stuff. His eyes were taken because he didn't pay attention, is what Cassandra is saying. And I think there's something to that. But remember, it says the way that he speaks of these women he desires is, she is right for me in my eyes. When he goes for the first one, that's what he says. And so, and it will, after this chapter, be the pattern. The people did what was right in their own eyes, right? And so this is related to paying attention. And I think that, Sandy, you were talking about it. The eyes are the window of the soul, right? And in the ancient world, they kind of thought, kind of like Superman, they thought that rays were shot out of your eyes and that's how you saw. So the image that Jesus is talking about when he's saying the eyes are the lamp of the body, and this idea that you're not objectively seeing the world. You are sending something out from you on how you see the world. Your eyes are not objective. They are serving a purpose for you. You are using your eyes to do the things you want to do. It's not like we think about noticing things as being like a Clockwork Orange. When the guy he's got his eyes like open and he can't stop looking at things. It's like, oh no, I can't look at this thing. That's not what our lives are actually like. Our eyes see and notice things based on our character. They are a window to the soul. We are sending something out. And that was the part of Samson that was completely messed up. So look, his eyes caused him to sin. They have been plucked out. You can you can do it yourself, or you can have God do it. And again, so I think we're supposed to, when we read that, feel a sense that it's good that this thing happened to Samson. Not good like, oh, I want that to happen, but that this is justice. Go ahead, Sandy. Let's finish this story.
Okay. Now the lords of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon their god and to rejoice. And they said, our God has given Samson our enemy into our hand. And when the people saw him, they praised their God. For they said, our God has given our enemy into our hand, the ravager of our country, who has killed so many of us. And when their hearts were merry, they said, call Samson that he may entertain us. So they called Samson out of the prison, and he entertained them. They made him stand between the pillars. And Samson said to the young man who held him by the hand, let me feel the pillars on which the house rests, that I may lean against them. Now the house was full of men and women. All the lords of the Philistines were there. And on the roof there were about 3,000 men and women who looked on while Samson entertained.
Samson entertained. Man, this was before Netflix. What do you guys want to watch today? I don't know. Bring up that guy that we plucked the eyes out. Yeah. I don't have anything else to add to that, so keep going.
Then Samson called to the Lord and said, O Lord God, please remember me, and please strengthen me only this once, O God, that I may be avenged on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And Samson grasped the 2 middle pillars on which the house rested. I always thought it was at like an entry or exit point. I didn't realize he was like under the he was part of the bearing wall on which the house rested, and he leaned his weight against them, his right hand on the one, his left hand on the other. And Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then he bowed with all his strength, and the house fell upon the lords and upon all the people who were in it. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those he had killed during his life. Then his brothers and all his family came down and took him, brought him up, and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah, his father. He had judged Israel 20 years.
Right. Just show this. This is one of the more famous depictions of it. So I'll bring that up. Yeah. So as you said, the load bearing, and it specifically says that there's people on the roof too. So you can imagine all of them coming down. The two pillars, like two eyes, right? The image of him being brought off into some form of slavery or exile. Like it's an image of him going off like Israel will be dragged off in the future. And it's like there's some kind of connection to the Garden of Eden here, where the opening of the eyes versus the clothing of the eyes, the covered with garments versus the removal of the hair. There's something about him being stripped. And then him put in this position of humiliation. But look at this. This again, when I talk about this story, it's difficult not to see, like to me, I've done a lot of studying on Messiah ben Joseph, right? And the Josephite Messiah is the Messiah who conquers through his righteous suffering. And so we see Samson primarily as this heroic figure, fighting with a donkey bone, lighting things on fire with fox tails and all this other stuff. It's the stuff of heroic bits, right? And then even I'm thinking children's Bibles probably end after he gets his hair cut off, that he loses his power. But instead, and this is why I labeled this stream this, so the dead whom he killed in his death were more than those whom he had killed during his life.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And there's a real, we were talking before about compromise, Sandy. I think there's this this beautiful power that someone has to be able to lie themselves down and be recreated, to die again and again and be resurrected, to be recreated. That there's some kind of a resurrection, some kind of and that the powerful person isn't scared of that, the willingness to lay down because you know that you'll be taken up, right? That it's not just for bad, that it can be for good. But in this story, it's muddied. It's so muddied because it would be clearer in a more righteous character. But we still get little hints of it in the story of Samson.
So I have a question. It's not a fully formed question, but the expression "in life and in death," or "as in life, so in death," like those two. Where do those come in some, like, why am I remembering those kind of, it goes back to your pattern at the beginning when I asked about the integer line, the like the peeling of things into the positive, the negative, into before.
Say again the image that this reminds you of. What was the image you just said?
In life, in life and in death, or as in life, so in death.
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of this, and this is a big problem with the character of Samson. I just left a comment on Chad's on the video that Chad the alcoholic was doing about he talks about the term identity. Like, what is your identity? Identity means sameness, right? Like the word identical, right? Identical twins means they look the same, right? And you get a term like, I was talking to him about integrity, that integrity is the same thing.
Oh my goodness. Integrity is a word I've just been carrying around with me for the last few years.
Okay, so maybe this is related to that. Is what you get is you sometimes have a person without integrity is a person who compromises, right? Instead of being the one thing, they become angry too easily. And it's just like, that's not who you are. That's not one thing. It's one of the reasons why we have so much suspicion about someone who's been hiding something for years, right? Is they have this deep, dark secret. And what that refers to is a lack of integrity. That seems like their life is one thing, but it's actually ripped apart by these different things. And in fact, this ripping apart is what death is, right? When you, like, your body has integrity, it's all held together. And then as soon as you die, you begin decomposing, right? Keep your composure. Yes. Keeping together. Losing your composure is the same as losing your integrity, decomposing, breaking apart. And something like addiction, people who experience it sometimes as a lack of identity, or having more than one identity, having a lack of character, where there's this thing that has the potential of turning you into a different person, right? And the language of possession used to be so strong that they would call it demon rum, right? Like, yes. where this thing, spirits, right? Drinks as spirits, that alcohol could take hold of you and you would all of a sudden become a different person, losing your integrity, which is exactly why Jesus even uses this language of your hand or your eye causing you to sin, right? Is the integrity. You're becoming, all of us are becoming one thing, right? And so as that thing is taking over, if you see this thing that it will have integrity, it will become all one thing. You have to get rid of if you're threatened by what that thing might be.
Okay, so that goes to some very important places and some other conversations I've been having as well. So let me ask this. I'm not going to, you know what? If you're curious, I might send you the posts that I put somewhere. But I wrote, one is a full one, one is a follow-up one. The question was, where it was put, the words I clipped out of theirs to comment on were, so you see, this really is the question of the day. It was a denominational question rather than, like, it wasn't strictly in. What does a denomination do that is so divided? Okay. And after I wrote my long post, I wrote back and said, oh, shoot. After all these words that I'd send, I forgot to answer the question. So I said, I can't tell you what you need to do, even though we are part of the same body. But that is where I start, with the body and the word so. If my body is so divided, because this is a truth that I live every day.
Yeah.
If my body is so divided, what? And in the earlier bit, I'd highlighted that I chose that out of several things I could have commented on, because I was contemplating the word so. Of all of the words that I could have chosen to contemplate and how they interact with other words, that was the one I chose.
So the the notion of the body being divided means that it's not a body. Is that there's a certain amount of division, that if it fully occurs, that those things, because again, identity having some kind of thing that unites and makes us the same, you can't just be the title, right? And sometimes, I mean, like this, maybe this is too symbolic, but Samson, as we were talking about, in what way is this man a Nazarite? In what way is this man living a higher life? He's not. And so at some point, the disease of what he is, the integrity of who he is this man without strength, without power, right?
Mhm.
And it would be way, way better if this was like, as I was saying before, it's like a blip. It's all of a sudden this kind of a thing happens to him, as opposed to being who he really is throughout his life.
Well, and when I think of the body, and I brought it up because your mind also went to something that Jesus said about, or where it was talking about, if the eye offends you, pluck it out. And that's what we normally spend a lot of time thinking about within the church is, we have these instructions, and I have to confess, I don't remember whether or not that shows up earlier in the Hebrew scriptures in the same pattern of discussion.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. But my middle line, this is the reality I deal with every day. When you look at, like Jacob will bring it up, what is the section of the New Testament that talks about, because the hand is not an eye, or the hand is not a foot.
Right.
Like,
yeah. Corinthians, yeah, Paul talking.
Yeah, in Paul, and he talks about what is the relationship of all of these component parts. We call it a body, singular.
Right.
I have one body.
Right.
I have many parts.
Yeah.
Recently, I watched some, what's the thing where people die and are brought back? And they say they remember.
Near-death experiences?
Yep. So I watched a documentary recently with some people on near-death experiences. And then YouTube was feeding me some other options to watch. And one of the things that it fed me was a story of a lady and a man. They were in another country somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And he collapsed very suddenly, and they rushed him to the hospital. It turned out that what had happened was, I don't remember the terminology used for the condition, but there had been a rupture to his stomach.
Okay, yeah.
And he was burning himself from the inside out.
Ooh, okay, yeah.
So that's been kind of in my mind a little bit the last few days, because I am a body with many parts, and some of the parts have very important jobs and are necessary to life. And if something happens to them that is not supposed to happen, they could kill me instantly, or a long hours. I felt bad. This man was laying there for days. And they kept saying, there's no doctor. We don't have a surgeon we don't have. And eventually he dies. And the surgeon shows up. I don't know. It was one of those timing things.
Mm-hmm.
When I wrote my reply today, and when I think about these things, I wondered if in some respects with Samson, plucking out the eyes gave him greater vision, because they're harassing him going, boy, are you ever blind? Do you want to see how blind feels? Okay. But my mind was also going to the story of the man who's stomach acid was literally eating him alive, burning him alive from the inside out.
Yeah, no, it's
So
there's some things that happen where I think they serve to illustrate what was always true, but now is dramatically more true. Right? So the person who is so easily possessed is a man enslaved. He is like, and the man who's enslaved to his passions is like an animal at the mill, right? It's interesting because he's hairy, which makes him like an animal, and then they cut his hair, but then once they cut his hair, they put him at the mill. And that was a thing. Like, you can see these images where they would have horses, or usually oxen, tied to, like, going in a circle, spinning a mill, right? Like that they would be doing a mill that way, right? So he's being reduced to an animal, but it's interesting because he's acted like an animal all throughout, right? I want, I take, I go, and I can't stop, right? And that can be used for good, but it's also used for bad. And it's this huge pulling apart which is occurring throughout his life, and so we see him as he truly is in the end. This display of Samson in his agony is what he is really like. It is the full consequences of what has occurred working their way through them. And we kind of see Samson in this moment being like a man waking up from a bad hangover. And the realization of everything that has been to him. And in the end, he has been a self-destructive person. Like, someone who is doing this kind of stuff, we describe as self-destructive. And so it seems like, because he's been such a self-destructive person, the only way that God can use such a self-destructive person is while the person is destroying themselves. And so in the end, the dead whom he killed in his death were more than those that he killed during his life. Right. And again, because this to me is the story of the whole book, and is the story of the Hebrew scriptures, is that if they will not be righteous, God will use the falling down as a way of bringing about goodness in this world.
can I share my words again for a second and tell you what I think of? Okay, so the majority way that we look at this, and what we're describing with Samson too, is if you say, so if my body is so divided, like it's just so divided, like it's self-destructing, like it's just, we usually say it about other things where we're joining with stuff. But what I was thinking of was when we say, if my body is so divided, and so, and so, and so, and so, and you look at the component parts, and everything is as it should be, then it's not self-destructing. It's doing what it's made to do. And my mind jumped back to the Tanya that Ben does with Jacob. And I look at this and I'm thinking, when you talk about the animal soul and the spirit soul, or is it the holy? I've been thinking all the way through here, if we understand the design of holiness as God made us, and if we live within that framework instead of the unholy framework, like there's always I don't know if it was in the same spot that Jacob talked about, going up or down the mountain, which way are you facing? Samson's not been facing a good direction. And I love that you bring up that the more that, like the dead he killed in his death are more than those he killed in his life. His life fulfilled a purpose of telling a story that's important to understand. But am I listening when I'm listening to the thing with the Tanya and the animal soul versus the other soul, and the what do you like? What are the component pieces, and what are the ones that have the louder voice in that moment? You know, is the stomach busy screaming and eating you?
Right,
Or
right.
is it busy digesting things that it's been given to digest? Like what's happening?
Right.
Like,
And I have a friend who passed away about a year ago, and she was an old woman who was such a little spitfire, and she could not stop. She was getting older and older, and she just wouldn't stop. And people were so amazed that like nothing was holding this woman down, right? And then she has a stroke, and the doctors say, well, she's like, it's probably like the last day. She's gonna die. She's done, right? And she goes on for another like 2 weeks in a state that the doctors could not understand. And I was just like, this woman, the integrity of her inability to stop, that even as her brain is basically dead, she can't stop. She just and I was visiting a friend this week who is dying of cancer, and it's the same thing. It's like you can see, even in how he's dying, he carried this hope, this light with him everywhere he went. And even as he's dying, this light is there, this integrity, this character, where it could still be presented, even in this extreme situation that feels like it would rip it from him. Instead, he's just becoming more and more the thing that he has been in his life, right? And I was actually talking to him about this because he was a diver with the police, where like if something was lost, possibly a body, in the water, he would go down. And in this one time he was down, you have two tanks as a diver. One is this big one that has tons of time, and the other one is like an emergency tank that's like this big, and it's good for like 10 minutes. Okay. He goes down, he gets to the bottom, he's working on stuff, and then he realizes that the guy who set him up connected the wrong tubes. So, and he can't switch to the other one. So he's at the bottom of the water, and he's got no oxygen, okay? And he's got to come up. And when you come up, what your instinct tells you to do is to hold on to your air so that you don't die. But if you do that, you will die. And what you have to do is exactly the opposite of what your instinct wants. As you rise, you must exhale no faster than the bubbles are naturally rising. Okay? And he does this thing, and he survives. Like, I was visiting, this is like, I don't know how many years ago it was at this point, but it was a very long time ago that this had happened to him. And this is an idea of discipline, where you would understand why someone would panic and they would do what this part of their body is telling them to do, and then they would die. But this man had enough integrity where the rules were so ingrained in him that he knew, this is what I do, this takes over, and this saves you, right?
Wow.
So that the good, like, yeah, and I see this happening right now in his life, where the hope he carried with him in life, he is carrying into his death. And you can witness someone die well. It seems like a thing that someone shouldn't be able to do, to die well. And he's doing such a good job dying. It is a thing to behold. This is the idea of integrity. And yeah, Yeah, I wish this was the story of Samson. Instead, he gets a good death, though he doesn't seem to deserve it. And by the way, sorry, just to make sure that we actually end on the scripture itself, is that one of the signs, it was taken as like a sign of God's blessing that you were able to be buried, right? And the idea of that it was actually bad. Again, this idea of death as a decomposing, losing your composure, falling apart. One of the things that they would do is even as you died, they would gather your bones back together. It was considered good for all the body parts to just even be in one box. The opposite of this is the death of Jezebel. When Jezebel dies, she's like ripped apart. Her parts are like you can't even gather her body back together. So it
Sorry.
says,
I'm listening to too much Israel news. They're
Yeah,
going
yeah.
through something like this right now. Yeah.
yeah. So let me just read the end of it. And Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then he bowed with all his strength, and the house fell upon the lords and upon all the people who were in it. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he had killed during his life. Then his brothers and all his family came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtal in the tomb of Manoah his father. He had judged Israel 20 years. So again, we already ended the judge's story yesterday with he judged Israel 20 years, which is how they oftentimes end a section of a judge. But we get this twice with Samson. It was unfitting to end him living heroically. That's how we ended last time. It is fitting for him to be dismembered and for him to be dying in such a manner. It is fitting. Unfortunate, but fitting. Sandy, I'm going to give you 20 seconds to say whatever you want to say, and then we'll go.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
That was all I was going to say. Oh, I love doing these readings with you. Thank you.
Well, the bread of affliction is very dry. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Oh, yeah.
Well, thank you all for coming on this Judges Bible study that occurred during Passover. Yeah.
We'll talk to you
Good times.
about it.
Yeah,
Passover.
we will be off for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks. But then I swear we will return and we will get into the most messed up section, which is immediately what follows after this. Thank you, Cassandra. Cassandra says happy anniversary. 10 years. 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Trying to remember 10 years. Isn't that like lace or something?
And honestly, if there's people out there celebrating Passover, happy Passover. I hope you have a good time celebrating and remembering. Remembering, Sandy, that's to bring the parts back together, like members of a body. These parts which naturally drift off and decompose, losing your composure, you must remember bringing the pieces, gathering them back together.
I'm counting on God to remember the story that he told of the bones in the desert and how the flesh came back on them, because I have a few missing pieces.
Yes. Gathering them back together. There's I remember this scene from a show. Someone's like flipping through a yearbook, and this one guy just goes, "Oh, I know that girl. She's not all there. Oh, she's like crazy. No, she's missing a toe."
Yeah.
Okay. Tons of fun. Thank you, Sandy. See you in 3 weeks because we're gone
Enjoy.
for 2.
Yes. And enjoy.
Bye, everyone.